it really boils down to just sit down, turn on the camera, and just go ahead and do your thing. The most important thing is to be really passionate about what you're doing. So I started 3D maybe when I was, I want to say like 12 or 13 or something. I just picked up a like introducing Maya book at the bookstore, like back in the day where you would learn 3D apps back in book format, right? And so I kind of picked that up. It came with a demo of Maya. I think it was like Maya, I don't know, 8 or something at the time. And kind of, learned all the basics of 3D like that, like what a vertex is, what a polygon is, like I learned all those things that way. And they kind of took a bit of a side burner for a while. And then, after high school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so there just so happened to be a school specializing in 3D right in my hometown. And so I kind of signed up for that, and the rest is history. So it was something I was really excited about, really passionate about from the get-go. I got really lucky and managed to get a job like right out of school, right place, right time. And so I started my career when I was like 18 or 19. So I moved from my small town to Montreal to work in a small game studio, and worked there for a good 5 years. So my first half of my career was in games. And then after 5 years in games, I was really starting to get that itch for just more detail, getting more better looking rendered, right? So eventually, unintentionally, I kind of transitioned into film. And so the way I did that was, it just so happened that there's a studio here in Norway, in Oslo, where I'm based now. They were working on a project that needed some Unreal Engine experience. And I just so happened to be using Unreal for most of my 3D career, right? Just because game artists at the time, when you wanted to showcase your environments and your characters, you often did it in a game engine to showcase that in your portfolio. And so I've been using Unreal for a really long time. And so I signed up for that project and got the job. And so I moved from Canada to Norway for that job. And then they just kind of kept me on board. And that was kind of my transition from games into visual effects and film. So it was kind of it just kind of I went with the flow, and it was a natural transition that way. So, and now I'm not even sure if I would go back in games. Like, I really enjoy working in film. I really enjoy just the problem solving that you have, where you just need to get a shot looking good, no matter what. Like, there's no real constraints. Like, there are, constraints, but not quite in the same way that games has. So that was that's pretty much the gist of it of my career. And then after, when COVID happened, I was living a bit in the Norwegian countryside, and I figured now was a good time to start a YouTube channel, because I was working remote at the time, but I had a bit more spare time because I wasn't commuting anymore. And so I just kind of started the channel, doing one video a week, a small little thing here and there, and the channel grew from there. So
tell us a little bit about why film is so interested in Unreal today. Because it's been kind of like this trend that has been going for a while, and kind of like your career kind of supports that thesis. And my question is, like, what makes it such a good kind of tool for people who are trying to do movies? Because originally it's still a game engine, basically. It's to build levels and people to jump around and shoot each other. So why does it work for film now, and what are like the biggest advantages that it kind of gives the film industry?
Well, I mean, for now, like the big thing is virtual production, right? So now everyone has seen like build LED volumes, that kind of thing. We've seen like The Mandalorian make the most of it. Movies like The Batman used it. So it's really, really cool to kind of get like an directly in camera, like what you see, what you get kind of result. Whereas previously you kind of needed, months and months of VFX work to actually composite your visual effect footage into your live action plate, right? So these things take time, but now that we can, with virtual production, we can kind of get it right away in camera. There's a big asterisk there, because there is a lot of post work to be done on these shots, even if you're using virtual production and LED volume. But it's really exciting because, with how fast graphics technology is going, we can get like pretty close. Like, of course, Unreal's not going to replace an offline render anytime soon. Anyone who says otherwise is kind of delusional. But it's getting really good. It looks so much better than it was just 5 or 10 years ago. So it's really exciting. We're making leaps and bounds. And I think Unreal's biggest strength right now is just the ability to put together a whole level that looks pretty dang good extremely fast. And so a lot of people are using it for previs stuff. So when you're just trying to kind of get a rough idea of what your shots are going to look like, it looks a whole lot better than just like the gray shaded blend shaders in Maya or 30th Max to get a play blast. So in Unreal, at least you can get some basic lighting, you can get some depth of field in there, you can get some fog, and get a much better impression of what your final shot is going to look like, versus just kind of just doing it the old school way with previs and play blast in Maya. So yeah, I mean it's a very big question, right? So like why film using Unreal more? It's just it's a lot of fun to play with. It's a lot of fun to use, and it's just really fast. Especially like that Mega Scans comes free, and that saves a ton of development time for the artist. Like if there's a few, I've worked in a few studios where we weren't allowed to use Mega Scans because it's just for in studio work when you're not using Unreal, it is prohibitively expensive. If you want to get a Mega Scans license, if you're working on a big budget VFX film and you're not using Unreal, you have to pay up for Mega Scans, and so on those productions, like I realized how much of a time saver Mega Scans is, and when you have to make each one of those assets yourself, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So, so that's there's so many individual advantages to using Unreal. It's a lot of fun, really exciting times.
William, so one of the things I think that people think about Unreal, even to this day, is that it's kind of like a challenging thing to get into. So people are like, well, it's too heavy, and it's like especially like if you're on a coding side and if you're like from games, people often kind of have these kind of like misconceptions that it's like too heavy, too complicated. A lot of people are starting to, like in schools, they don't really learn Unreal as much as they could, and they have this kind of like in their mind that, maybe I should stick with something else. But at the same time, when I look at artists, they really like it. Like they really embrace it, and they do a bunch of stuff with it. And it's always a great pleasure to kind of go, anywhere and have a look at all those amazing environments that people come up with. And I'm wondering if you could kind of like dispel some of those misconceptions when people think of the complexity of kind of like the heaviness, and then it's sort of like an ordeal to start doing something with Unreal. You need to sit down, get your YouTube ready, start watching all the tutorials, and kind of like you can't really proceed quickly with it.
I think that the answer to that question is kind of twofold. Like it depends if you're going for game development or if you're doing like actual, just making some pretty looking game art, or if you are working in visual effects and film or just trying to get some really high quality final pixel offline renders done. So I mean, people coming from like Unity who want to make a game, just like actually just scripting and getting a game prototype up and running. Unreal versus Unity is Unity's kind of going to win because is it C# that Unity uses? Unreal C++? I get the two mixed up all the time. And so it's a lot harder to script stuff in C++. So Unity is just a lot quicker to get your game prototype up and running. But when it comes to the art side of things, Unreal, at least in the past, Unreal has been a whole lot more artist-friendly than Unity was. So I remember back when I was learning, when I was back in school and back when I was starting my career in games, you didn't really have like a material editor in Unity. Like you had to have a coder like write a shader for you. And so like node-based editing for materials and shaders was just non-existent in Unity. You needed a third-party plugin called Shader Forge, I think, to make your own custom material. Whereas Unreal, it just worked out of the box. So for artists, it was really easy for them to get into and just make some amazing-looking stuff, regardless, like whether or not they wanted to make a game or not. If you wanted to make some good-looking game art, Unreal was the way to go. It just looked better. It was easier to get into, much more user-friendly, much more intuitive. It's very visual stuff. So that's kind of why I got into Unreal instead of Unity for the most part. But then what makes Unreal really complicated is, When people come from an offline rendering background, when people who rendered in V-Ray and Arnold and Octane Redshift, and then or from a traditional visual effects pipeline and come into Unreal, they're completely confused because nothing is the same. The terminology, the nomenclature of everything is different. And then there's so many performance optimizations in Unreal. So like, your shadows at some point will fade out after an X amount of distance, which is just like, I don't care about the performance. Just give me the max quality. And there's no like really quick and easy way to toggle that. Like there are some scalability settings you can turn on, but even at max scalability settings, sometimes you still need to override those limitations with more console variables. And having to know which console variable to use is not the most user-friendly thing in the world. Like you kind of have to know what to look for, and the console variable change from one version to another. Some of them become obsolete after a while. So for anyone coming from a traditional visual effects background into Unreal with no games experience, it is very overwhelming for them. And that's kind of why I started my YouTube channel. It's just because I had the experience in both games and in visual effects. So I kind of knew what both industries needed and wanted. And so I kind of helped bridge that gap for them. So for those who have watched my channel, they know that I tend to focus more on like the cinematics and like rendering side of things and less so game art nowadays, for now anyway. So I get a lot of people commenting like, oh, this is not applicable to games because, the frame rate is terrible. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point for now. I'm not really making it a game focused channel, but yeah, it's Unreal's used for so many things nowadays, and it's not just games anymore. So it's really hard to reconcile both user bases.
Yeah, I think it's a great comment. There's definitely so much going on with this engine, and it's really hard to keep up and really understand what do you want from it. And this kind of like gets me to the next question about kind of like education about these complicated technical tools on YouTube. Tell us a little bit more how you approach this on your channel. Like what's your angle? Like, do you just walk people through the process? Do you give them some basics in the beginning? And just kind of share your view of what is the best way to start learning these kind of complicated tools.
The best way to go, I mean, YouTube is the best way to do it. There's so much good content on YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff out there as well. But usually, for the most part, like the larger channels and the videos that have a lot of views, like we don't have the dislike counter in YouTube anymore. But fortunately, if you just look at the view count, there's a lot of really good stuff out there. So I would just recommend watching a lot of workflow tutorials and just watching someone's process, because there's so many different ways of doing the same thing in Unreal. And so there's no one way to make a level, right? Everyone has their little tricks and tips and stuff. And so that's kind of what I like to do. Like previously I used to make like really short, to the point tutorials about like, I don't know, like how to get better depth of field or how to get some, I can't remember anymore. It's been so long, but so I used to make really short tutorials, and now they tend to be a little bit longer and more workflow based and less kind of nitty gritty and more applicable on a bigger scale. And so it really, for someone who's new to Unreal, I would just recommend just to jump in, and take a look at a lot of the example levels that Epic has for free on the Epic Marketplace. You can download entire packages, entire like levels, and kind of reverse engineer what they did from there, right? So when it comes to, let's say, lighting, I would just go into their lighting folder and kind of take a look at what every light is doing and how it behaves and how it works, and just start playing around and just dipping your toes in and just really start breaking down how a thing was done. And then from there, once you start familiarizing yourself with the tools, then you can kind of narrow down your search. Like, okay, like how does the post-process volume work? Or how did the skylight work? Or how did the, how did the exponential height fog work with, atmosphere settings, right? Like, because you can get very, very, very overwhelmed just at the immensity of the tool. But not only that, it's just there's so many things that are kind of legacy features that are not really supported anymore, because they're just remain from Unreal Engine 4. And when UE5 came out, Lumen took over, and like a lot of things that just don't work anymore are still there. So like in the post-process volume, you still have like the depth of field setting, but you don't control depth of field through there anymore. So it's really, really hard for people to jump in. And that's where YouTube comes in handy. But you kind of have to pay attention to the date that the video was published, because a lot of the time something that was applicable like 2 years ago no longer is valid because the tool has changed or there's a new version, and like those tricks kind of broke and changed over time, right? So it's all, and like you say, things happen so fast. There's always new stuff coming out constantly. Like I'm barely able to keep up with, like now 5.3 is coming out, and I'm just like, oh cool, well, I've barely used 5.2 and now 5.3 is coming out. Like I need to kind of keep up with it, and it can be very overwhelming for people. So my recommendation for those of you getting started, just take a step back, just kind of try to learn through a project. Like start small. Like let's say you want to make a small cave, learn through actually going ahead and making a project, because trying to just learn individual features is really hard. But learning from a practical perspective is a lot easier. So if you're going to make a cave, you're going to learn a lot about, indirect lighting. You're going to learn a lot about, how to use nanite to get to that really nicer geo in the foreground. Like you're going to learn because it's applicable to your current project. And so apply learning to a project is my recommendation, I would say.
I think it's a great thing. Like my thinking about it is like, let's start with a very small thing, because I really like visual effects overall, and for me it's like you just go and you do like a little poof on a screen, and then just kind of go from there and try to get more and more, and then this is how you learn. And I think there's a channel called gamedev toolkit or something, where they kind of talked about how they learned how to make games, and it was all kind of like coming from small problems. So kind of like they had one small problem, then another small problem, then another small problem, and kind of like it's all combined into this humongous thing as a game project. William, I had another question. So first of all, we love your channel. That's why we kind of like approached, wanted to do the conversation. We covered your stuff on 80 level extensively during this year. Can you maybe explain to the audience what it takes to run a thing like that? Because people usually think, and again, coming back to our theme of like misconceptions and so on, is like that, it's so easy. You just you just turn on your camera, you just sit down, and then you just blabber for whatever, like an hour and a half, and then it's done. Tell us a little bit about what goes into all of those things just to make a video and put it there.
You kind of hit the nail on the head. It really boils down to just sit down, turn on the camera, and just go ahead and do your thing. The most important thing is to be really passionate about what you're doing and to be excited about what you're doing, and at least be somewhat decent at what you're doing. So if you're really passionate about gardening and you just love plants, and you've been, plants has been your biggest hobby for the past 20 years, go make a channel about it. It doesn't matter if a lot of people overthink it, like, oh, I'm not, I'm not like funny enough, or I'm not like good looking enough, or whatever. Like if my idiot face can succeed on YouTube, like anyone can, because I'm like the most shy dude of all time. If you had told me like 2 or 3 years ago, or I guess it's been 2 or 3 years, 4 years ago, that I would, be doing a lot of YouTube, I would have laughed you out of the room, because it was just so completely inconceivable to me. And it was just like a very natural transition into it. I started the channel just for fun. It was like middle of COVID. It was in December 2020. And I figured I had the camera, I've got the microphones, I got everything I need. Why not? And so I just kind of started bit by bit, like really short bite-sized tutorials. Some videos were like 5 minutes long. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I've always been passionate about 3D and rendering in general and lighting. And so it was a very natural transition. And then when I realized that it wasn't that hard to do it, it's very encouraging. And so I got very lucky. I think I was at the right place at the right time. Some people take years and years and years to get to the point where my channel is now. And I'm really, really thankful for that. I'm very appreciative of everyone who's been watching and supporting the channel. But all that to say is, if I can do it, anyone can. There's nothing special about the way that I do things. I I think the only difference is I've been doing what I do for a long time. And at some point, like, everyone has to start somewhere. But if there's something you are good at and something you're excited about, YouTube is the platform for you. Like, go ahead and do it. Just turn on that camera and you're going to cringe. It's going to be terrible. Like, the first few times you listen to yourself talking, it's just actually just cringeworthy. And you're like, oh, I really hate the sound of my voice. But just power through it and you get used to it. And from there, it just, you kind of learn to, you grow, and how would I describe it? You just, yeah, you get used to it. And it's, you figure whatever feels right at the time is how you're going to grow. So you're just going to get a gut feeling for what feels right and what doesn't feel right. So yeah.
So I think you mentioned that you kind of started when COVID happened, and it was obviously a very challenging time and hard on a lot of people. But I'm wondering if you've seen kind of like the uptake of interest in 3D in general during that time. Because on our platform, we did kind of notice that people started to gravitate towards 3D more, and search requests for stuff like Blender, learning Blender, and so on really grew. And I'm trying to understand why this happened, whether it's kind of like the environment that kind of like people really didn't figure out what to do, so they said, okay, so I might just learn a new thing to do, 3D. Or maybe it's just kind of like this whole idea of all those projects like the metaverse, all the stuff around us, and kind of like this gradual shift from kind of like 2D finally into like a 3D space. Like, do you see a similar trend, or maybe not? Or
like, I didn't start the channel until COVID, right? So I'd have nothing to compare it to like previously. But I do have a feeling that I did ride that wave. So like when the channel started, it just so happened there was a lot of people learning Unreal at the time. And so I just kind of, like I said, I rode that wave while it was there. But it absolutely makes sense because people were just at home more. They had more time. And so when you're locked down at home, what do you do except finally have time to learn the things you were always curious about? And now is like, it's the easiest time in the world to learn new things, because like everything, there's courses and tutorials and guides for absolutely everything nowadays. And the production value of most of these things is phenomenal. Not to sound like an old boomer here, but back when I was starting 3D, there were no like video tutorials. There were extremely few and far between. And so you kind of had to learn through trial and error. Like, yes, there were books at the time. Like, I still have like my old ZBrush book. But like, there was no really, YouTube at the time wasn't really a thing. No, I don't think it was. Maybe it was like pre-YouTube. So, and even when YouTube was a thing, like there were just not that many tutorials and courses. Like, I think Noman goes way back, but yeah, so the accessibility of courses and tutorials were just not there. But nowadays, like, I mean, if you want to learn anything, there's a course for it. And so it's just really, really easy for most people to get into it nowadays.
To kind of like add to this idea of tutorials, I talked to Wes McDermott from Adobe yesterday, I think. And he remembered that when he started, tutorials were provided on VHS tapes. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I would get like a VHS. I mean, this is the first time I've actually heard it, because I didn't really have that luxury. And you would get a VHS tape and then you would watch it and kind of learn from there. Well, this is like the YouTube of the days old, kind of like if we are comparing how much of a boomer you and I are. Like, I guess we're somewhere in between those things.
I'm definitely a millennial. I'm not that old yet, but I really don't mean to sound like, oh, back in my day, life was harder. Like, you had to learn the hard way back in the day. Like, you kind of had to learn through trial and error, like a lot of troubleshooting, and when things not working, you kind of have to figure it out and find some solutions. And so I think that kind of shaped me into the person I am today. For better or worse. Like, I like to think that I'm a pretty good problem solver. And so, whenever we're facing an issue at work or in production or something, like, I'll find a way to make it work, even if it's, a little bit more of an unconventional approach. At the end of the day, whatever works, works. If it requires a ton of duct tape, hey, the shot's out the door, the
Yeah.
client is happy, that's all that matters.
In a way, in a way, films is almost easier this way, right? Because in games you do have to go through this hundreds and hundreds of, optimizations and LODs and imposters and just trying to make this thing run. Because this is one of the things that we're kind of struggling with 80 level. We're working on this large project where we want to help visualize these environments in kind of like in the browser. So we launch them on a computer and then stream them in the browser. And what happens is a lot of those environments, they're not really, they're portfolio pieces. They're not really meant to kind of be kind of like technically okay. So whenever we run them, like the memory instantaneously runs out, or like they crash, or they start to slow down. So it's like, it's a never-ending process of kind of trial and error. But at the same time, what we see is like, and probably your YouTube channel is like one of those, one of the great illustrations that there's a lot of people interested in that. Like there's like a lot of people who are getting into it and trying to learn things like Unreal or Blender or all that other software out there. And I guess my question is like, do you feel like this happens because the tools are becoming more accessible? Because even if you jump, 10 years before and think about stuff like Maya or whatever, I feel those things were pretty complicated. They're still complicated today, but do you feel like things maybe are getting a little bit easier? Do you think it's
100% getting easier because, especially with Unreal, because you have so many like presets. Like, just to give you an example, the Megascans library alone, the entirety of the Epic Marketplace, you can just download whatever you need, add to your project, and it's ready to go. Like you can just plug and play animations, you can add whatever assets, 3D scanned assets, photogrammetry stuff, trees. You can build up entire levels without having to have created a single asset. 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't do that. You had to actually, okay, asset packs did exist back in the day, but for the most part, if you wanted something a little bit more unique, you had to make it yourself. You had to you had to learn modeling, you had to learn UV, you had to learn texturing, you had to learn to, like importing, exporting that from Maya into Unreal or vice versa. And then you just had to do the layout, then you had to do the lighting. And the lighting back then was not, real time. Well, it was real time, but there was no ray tracing. There was no any of that indirect lighting. So you had to learn the really technical side of light map UVs. And then you had to figure out lighting and do the technical side of lighting. Like even in visual effects and film, back in the day, you had like a renderer called Mental Ray, and that was a whole other level of complexity. I learned Mental Ray in school, and it would frankly terrible. Like I really, really don't miss it. It's just, yeah, everything has gotten a lot easier with time, and so it does require, I guess, less foundational skills to kind of put things together. You can get some really good results very quickly without too much work. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? I think that can definitely not hamper the growth, but students might find that they're getting results that are really good, but then they run into the issue where when they run into certain problems or issues or any kind of issue run into production, they don't really know how to fix it because it's beyond the scope of understanding. So, not to sound like super old again, but like when you do struggle, you do learn a lot of things the hard way. And so that I think that helps you in the long run. But yeah, to answer your question, I do think things have gotten a lot easier nowadays, and which is a good thing too, because then more people can get into it and then be passionate about it, like we all are. So I'm not going to like gatekeep it, like, oh, you're not a real artist because you have it easy. Not at all. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah, on our side, and again, I think when we'll publish this, it's going to be probably the end of the year. But right now, when we're in August of 2023, coming from SIGGRAPH and having been able to talk to like the likes of like Autodesk and NVIDIA and so many other companies, this is like a big thing. So people really want to make this stuff accessible, and I think to kind of like to support your point, I think it's great. Like it's the more accessible those tools are, the more incredible stuff we're gonna see, in this 3D world. And maybe kind of like this guides me to the next question is, when you think about the future of this, virtual production, film, games, 3D, what do you feel like how do the next kind of 5 years look like? Do you think it's gonna be? I'm just gonna throw you some ideas to bounce off. Maybe it's more on the AI side. Maybe it's more on this, like you said, mega scans, photogrammetry, and Google's gonna scan everything and give us access to like the 3D copy of the world to play around with. Maybe there are some other things. Like, what do you feel is going to happen? You may start with like film because it's close to what you're doing.
Ooh, I mean, that's a huge question. I mean, it's we kind of have to address the elephant in the room, and that's AI. Like AI has just kind of been making waves the past year or so, and that's not going anywhere. Like I think it's pretty naive to think that we can go to pre-AI days because that's just never going to happen. So AI is going to get a whole lot better. How that changes our day-to-day life, I'm not entirely sure, and I think it's impossible to guess because it's just things change so fast when it comes to that. But then again, like we've been using AI or machine learning based tool for quite a long time, actually. That's not totally new. The generative AI stuff is pretty new, but like using machine learning to, make your tool better and faster, that's been around for a while. And so the way I see it is it's most likely for now, at least going to be a new tool that we're going to have to learn. I don't think what we do, at least in film and visual effects, I don't think that's going to change fundamentally yet. Probably will, down the line, absolutely. But for now, yeah, I think the tool for like maybe making for like rotoscoping when you're doing compositing work, having AI-based tool to kind of make that a whole lot easier. Basically, all the mundane and really like annoying tasks that no one likes to do, stuff like doing UV unwrapping. If AI can just kind of make that an automated process, thank goodness, that would be amazing. I'm still waiting for it. But it's not around yet, but hopefully it comes. So I hope that AI makes our jobs a lot easier. But at the same time, I think that's also just going to mean we have way more work to do. So, it'll make our lives a bit easier, but we're just going to have way more on our plate because we can do more faster. So whether or not we end up happier artists is another can of worms that I'm not going to get into. But yeah, I do think AI is definitely is what's going to change things. But we're 3D artists. Like we're used to learning new tools. We're used to like having to adapt and pick up new software and like, oh, I'm going to learn like Blender this weekend or whatever. Like this is not new. Like this is okay. It's part of the job, right? So there's no real point in like being afraid of it. But I do understand why people are.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great point to kind of summarize our conversation. Although it seems like every year there's some kind of a disruption in the world of 3D, and it's fascinating if you compare it to other industries, because when you look at stuff like book publishing, for example, like the greatest disruption in the current history for them was the introduction of Kindle. When they kind of looked at Amazon Kindle, they're like, oh no, we're all going out of business because it holds a bunch of books and it's online and they are being sold at the same price. The price of it was lower, so it was like $10 and so on. For them, it was kind of like, and still that industry is still here. Books are still being printed, being written, and
It's really hard to know like where it's gonna take us and what's gonna happen. So like I guess just like don't panic. Like it's not gonna be in any one of the extremes. It's gonna be like somewhere in the middle where it's gonna be like pretty okay. So that's at least maybe that's my ignorant way of looking at it, but I think that's what helped me sleep at night. So there's that, but also there was one more thing at one point I wanted to make, and I can't remember. It just kind of escaped me. But yeah, that was what was it? Damn it. Anyway, continue. Sorry, it'll come back to me.
No, I do think like if we think kind of put a little bit of a cooler hat on and sleep on it, metaphorically speaking, right? You would start to understand that even now at this time, people are already adjusting. It sounds like it's this incredible, horrible thing that's gonna take away your jobs and all that other stuff, but at the same time, it is being used. There are copyright laws. People are looking into it, and I do have kind of like one comment, kind of again to support one of your points, is take the technical stuff out of it with AI. Like nobody likes doing like UVs or kind of like all those optimizations. It's such a tedious, maybe some people, but it's just kind of like, I feel like it's, if this goes away, you just see so much more creativity. It's like making Photoshop basically more accessible. Like you give this tool to people and suddenly, you know, there's so much stuff that you can do with it. And I feel like with 3D, it's gonna be very similar. And
it's a lot like cameras, right? Where like with
yeah.
the accessibility of really high end cameras nowadays, like everyone has a pretty dang good phone in their camera in their pocket now. Because like modern smartphones take absolutely wonderful photos. Did that make everyone a photographer? Absolutely not. So you're still going to have like, there's still a place for like good photographers who are using proper hardware for it. And so just because something is more accessible doesn't mean it necessarily waters down the professional usage of it. So yeah, I think it's like it's making waves. It's new, it's disruptive, and so of course, like naturally, people are kind of freaking out. But you know, like anything in life, it's probably going to be fine. Like we're just going to adapt. Like we're, you know, right now it's kind of the Wild West because there's no real laws around it yet. Like there's no ethical laws involved, or we don't really know, you know, things where like with the generative stuff, we don't know where that data set came from. It's an ethically sourced data set. Who knows, right? So like until that kind of calms down a little bit, I think it's definitely things are going to keep changing until there's some, what's the word? Until the legality of things kind of comes into place. Because now, like you said, I don't think you can copyright AI art. And so if you use it for production work, do you actually own that work? I guess maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, William, but kind of like in this times of uncertainty and not figuring out what to do next, can you give our listeners, readers, and viewers advice? So let's say I'm just starting out in games, or I'm just starting out in 3D, and I want to build something nice. Like, apart from your wonderful channel, what other sources are there to start? Like, do you think people should go to school? Do you think the basics are important? Do you feel like you could start with certain software? What are like the maybe 3 to 5 things that you feel are kind of a good way to start?
That's a really good question. When it comes to school, I'm very reluctant to give an answer on that, mostly because, like, yes, I did go to school to learn 3D, but the school I went to was absolutely terrible. It was a really, really bad school to the point where like it got sued and went bankrupt. It was not great. It was the kind of school that would hire its own students to teach next semester. So you can imagine like the ancestral nature of that process was not very good. So should I have saved that money instead and just kind of worked from home and to kind of learn through, you know, trial and error? That depends on how disciplined you are. I think there are definitely benefits to going to school and learning stuff, mostly because of the networking you make, the contacts, but also like having peers around you kind of doing the same thing pushes you in a way that just being at home in your mom's basement learning stuff is not going to help you, right? So there are definitely pros and cons to doing both. It's not my place to say whether or not someone should or shouldn't go to school. What worked for me was definitely going to school, even if it was a terrible one. It got me at the right place and where I needed to be, when I needed to be there. But I would say that also 95% of what I know is I'm self-taught for the most part. So I learned the core basics in school, and the rest is just kind of learned on my own and on the job. So here's the thing, the biggest difference is if you have the chance to get a job instead of going to school, go get a job in the industry, because that is how you're going to learn. You're going to learn at an exponential rate, so much faster than if you go to school. Of course, it's hard to get a job if you never went to school and you don't know anything. But case in point, like if you can't get the foot in the door, if you get that opportunity, just grab that opportunity and hang on to it with your dear life, because that is definitely the best way to learn. It's on the job for sure. For those of you who are getting started and you don't really know where to start, look around and see if there's any workshops or schools in your area. And if there aren't, YouTube is a great opportunity for that. And so there's lots of really good free content. Now, whether or not the stuff you learn on YouTube is good enough to get you a job depends on you. It really depends on whether or not you have the eye for detail. Like, for example, like we've hired artists in film and visual effects where they might not be the best artists, but they had from a technical perspective, but they had the eye. We could tell that they had a good eye for detail, and that is the key here. It doesn't matter so much which software you use or which ones you pick. You can learn the tools. Anyone can learn the new tool. Like, I didn't even know Maya when I started in visual effects. In the studio that I was working at, they were Maya users. I came from a 3ds Max background. But that's fine. That's not a problem because you can learn that in about a week. So what you learn is not as important as what you create with those tools. So as long as you have a good eye for detail, a good eye for the fundamentals of art, good composition, good lighting, good use of color, those are the important things. The technical stuff you can learn, but it's really hard to develop an eye for these things. So yeah, and it's really hard to say like what having a good eye means. I think you just gotta make more work, and that's the only way to do it. It's just throw yourself in there, dive in, create what you think it looks great, and accept criticism. Post your work online, and be willing to take criticism constructively and don't take it personally. Like, good criticism is the best way to learn. So reach out to someone who works in the industry. Reach out to someone who might be working, who already has the job that you want, and ask them for feedback. And tell them to not hold back, because that's how I learned. That's how you learn the hard way. But people are really, really harsh and not aggressive, but very harsh in their feedback towards you. Yeah, it stings because you may have spent, days on this particular piece, and then they rip it apart. And, before you say, this is terrible because of X, Y, Z. As long as it's constructive, you can learn from this. It's nothing personal. It's not an attack against you. It's just, if you use that feedback and improve your work, that is how you improve. And so I think that's the biggest self-improvement tip for anyone is to try to find someone who is better than you and tell them to rip apart your work. It's as simple as that.
William, thank you so much. I think it was a very good interview and great advice. We'll leave the links in the description to the video and to your channel so people can check it out. Thank you so much one more time, and good luck with your YouTube channel.
Thanks so much. Great seeing you.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.